unfortunate delay. My name is Bala Vijayabhushan, disciple of Satsarup Maharaj. I worked with him closely on the Prabhupada Lilamrita, mostly as a interviewer. Actually, the first thing I did was organize the letters. The letters had been collected at BBT in Los Angeles. People sent copies of their letters. And that was the first line of, say, interview or information was what Prabhupada said himself or got letters from him, especially from before he came to America. So all his correspondence was organized, and then all the persons were leads. You know, all the persons named were leads. So finding them and interviewing them was an adventure. And so we had different resources. You know, we had persons that were typing like a team in LA, madly typing all of Prabhupada's lectures, and then they would pick up lectures and room conversations, and then from that they would pick up different biographical information that Prabhupada himself had given. You know, he might mention a place that he went to or people that he met, and different things about his childhood or his business. All these things were, you know, in his own record and in his own words. So these were very important pieces of the puzzle. And then while out interviewing, I would get things like movies, more letters, movies, and of course the interviews. The interviews were very, at that time, that was 1979, at that time the memories were quite vivid. It's not like 40 years later now that, you know, people are trying to remember what went on. They were just in the midst of separation from Prabhupada, real intense separation. So probably 80% of the people ended up crying in the interview. It was such intense emotional experience for them to remember Prabhupada in such a personal way, so close to his departure. So we had that information. All that information was then typed. I traveled with one of those Indian steel trunks, or not steel, aluminum trunk that would lock, and I had a good Sony tape recorder as well as cassette tapes and my clothes, etc. in the trunk. My clothes, just another set of dhotis and kurtas. And that was it. I would travel around the world and stay as long as there was someone to interview. And, you know, ultimately I went to every continent except Australia and Africa. I went everywhere else where Prabhupada had gone and had exchanges with people, devotees, professors, poets, medical doctors, all kinds of people whose lives that he touched. So the importance of the Lilamrita is incalculable because it was done so soon after Prabhupada disappeared. Like in the history of biographies of saintly persons, none have been done so close to the departure of the person. Prabhupada Lilamrita stands out like that. And that's also the importance of reading the whole biography. Satsuru Maharaj mentioned this in a Zoom talk he gave to the congregation at Bhaktivedanta Manor. It's like practically the first thing he said is like, what you really have to do is read to get the full essence of Prabhupada. You have to get the whole Lilamrita. You don't get that in the condensed version. There's different names for it. He built the house the whole world could live in, etc. So that puts it in a category all of its own. And he mentioned that you just don't get Prabhupada. I did the I lost my train of thought. So anyway, the condensing of the book was done simply by deletion. It's exactly the same material as the bigger version, only the first volume had to be rewritten from 300 pages down to 55. And that was the only part that was rewritten. The whole other 6 volumes were all just by deletion, deleted different passages, and everyone was, heartbreaking to take it out because it was so much nectar. So what you lose is the essence of Prabhupada, the sweetness of Prabhupada, and you get like a regular biography with all the data there, but the sweetness is taken out compared to when you read the whole series, all the volumes. They're very inexpensive. They've been reprinted in India. I think they're available. You may have them in the store. I know they're available to the boys. Ram Roy and the boys in New York Temple, they have a big stock of them, and they're $50 or $100 or something like that. Certainly affordable. And our recommendation is that you read them all to really get the essence of Prabhupada. As far as the actual inner workings of the biography team, it was a whole team effort, including there was many typists. All the interviews had to be typed, and all the room conversations and Bhagavatam and all of that had to be typed in order to get things out that were biographically important leads. So there was that would be the first step, to collect whatever leads we had in the the books, and then Satsuma Raj would send me. It was done chronologically, so he would send me to whatever places there were. He had a sense of how many pages would be covered by a certain number of years in a number of places. So I would go to those places and do interviews, and then that material would go back to the typists. Then it went to a person who compiled it and put it into order chronologically. Then there was another person who took that material and refined it more to say, let's just say 5 people gave the same story. Well, 3 of them might have not been so devotionally stable, and the others may have 2 completely different, not completely different, but different details of the same event, and then you'd look at what the others would say and try and come up with the most viable explanation or coverage of an event. And then all of them would be handed to Satsuma Raj, all the things that had been put in order and then squeezed into the category that we wanted. So he would get that information and get up very early, get up at 11 or 12 o'clock and work on it during prime time. So that hi, Bo Mook. Mook's my old buddy. So then we would work from that material also. We would get other, we'd ask those people. Well, actually, they would have been interviewed previously. Or if someone else interviewed and they gave leads for people to interview, I would interview them again. And it was very important to let people talk. We had what were called canned memories, which means it was a memory that's firmly burned into someone's wiring in their brain of exactly what they felt and what they thought they saw and heard during an event with Prabhupada. And then let them speak their, all their canned memories without cutting in and asking questions. And then take notes. And this is good information for anyone doing interviews. And then make notes during that, and then ask your questions afterward. You would say, who the important ones were, who else was there, and then those would all be leads to other people in that event that would remember that particular event. And hopefully they were in the same area, or sometimes, especially in America, you get people in California that were in New York when Prabhupada was there, or vice versa. In New York when Prabhupada was in California. We had quite a few like that. So that was a very important piece of information. And then you'd ask more details of, colors and sights and smells and what Prabhupada said and what was the mood and what did the other say. If it was a professor, what did they say? This is all if if he didn't have a tape of it going, or if there was a tape, that would be studied carefully. And then the background, the setting was all there, so that was an important part. India was particularly interesting because we're talking, 1979, 1980, so that's, more than 40 years ago. Basically, India hadn't changed since Prabhupada was there. Even his house where he was born and so many different things. So all those places were the same. So you'd get pictures of them and talk to the people and try to discern what was, actually valid and what was a little bit sort of not straightforward. For example, there was probably 20 people that said they would, that this was the typewriter that Swamiji typed his manuscripts on, and then, it always involved a little bit of money to buy the typewriter and that kind of thing. So, but everyone, since Prabhupada became famous, everyone wanted to be seen as close to him, and a number of people said that they were the one that suggested that Swamiji go to New York to preach first. I was the one that sent Swamiji like that. We got a lot of that in India. But there's, other than that, there was so much available information from India. I remember in particular, like Prabhupada had his room where he did type at, what was the name of that colony? I don't remember the name of the place where he stayed, that particular, but you could take the walk that he would take to go to the publisher, or not the publisher, the printer. It was all hand typeset, old style, where there'd be the, they'd individually put in typesetting, little squares with the letters on them, and they would typeset and then roll it by hand, and it's a real ancient operation. But you could walk there, and then the paper seller was there, and the carts were there. They carried the paper on, and we would check it out. Like for example, the paper seller, Siddhamal and Sons. So I said, well, how do we know that Swamiji actually bought his paper here? So he goes to this dusty old wall full of customers' files. He pulled out Prabhupada's file and dusted the thing off, and the dust was flying. And he opened it up, and sure enough, there was his receipts, and everything was there on file in this dusty old room. So, it was unique like that, and you get that kind of confirmation that yes, Prabhupada was here, and yes, he bought his paper here, and then they'd have these men, because it was such tight quarters, they'd have carts that were relatively narrow, and because there was really no room for animals, you'd have these carts loaded high with paper and books, and it was the whole book printing area. And they were still there, still using them, and you had to really pay attention, otherwise you'd get run over. It was that sort of mad, close association. So that was his, just picture Prabhupada in his dhoti and pointy shoes and Swami hat, mixing in this milieu of mad, passionate work going on. And then there was another short walk to the printer. Printing press wasn't there at the time. The owner, still lived in the neighborhood. So he came by to see what was up, and he said, "Oh yes, I sold that typesetter to such and such place." And so we were able to go and get pictures of that. There was, it was quite a scene. I don't know if any of you have been to India, but especially then, it was very easy to get a crowd, and, it's very fragile, when there's money involved. So they decided that, they would charge, basically the crowd decided that, the man should charge for the taking pictures of the press. And he, so we did that, took the pictures, and then they surrounded the car, and it was actually scary, because they were getting angry that they knew we had money and we're sitting in the car. And they started pulling the driver out of the car. That's usually what they do, is they beat up the driver, and then, you feel sorry for him, so you pay up. So, before they could get him out, what we did was, I was sitting in the front seat, and threw $100 or 100 rupee note out the window, and so there was a big fight and diving for that. And so when they did that, I put my foot on the gas, so the people in front of the car had to jump away, and they saw we meant business, because they were about to get run over. And even the driver was kind of on the side of the crowd. He said, "No, Swamiji, no, Swami. We should not do this thing." But we were scared. We had to get out of there. Satru Maharaj was in the car, and who else was there? A photographer just died. I forget his name, from BTG. And so that was just one of the many scenes that went on in old Delhi. It was a very unique atmosphere. So, we could actually trace Prabhupada's movements, and pictorially in writing, of course, get a very accurate feel for what Prabhupada was going through to get his Bhagavatams printed. And BTG, the printer, is one of the more poignant memories, was the person who printed the PTG for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada would walk, I think it was it 5 miles or it would have been kilometers, 5 kilometers, just because he didn't want to pay the bus fare. And he had, very thin dhoti, torn and then sewn and torn and sewn again. And the man said he hadn't, could tell that he hadn't had breakfast and that his chadar was not thick enough for the weather. He would shiver a little until, he got his hot milk. So, and he would give him breakfast, and then Prabhupada would, somehow or other, he convinced the man to give him partial stacks of the BTGs so that he could sell them, give him his money for the second stack and that kind of thing. And then finally Prabhupada couldn't pay it all. But the man felt like this was a worthy cause, but then it went on for so long. He says, Swamiji, I can't just keep doing this. So that was one reason that there was lapses in the printing of BTGs. There just really no money to do it. So I switched from books to magazines. I have to go back. The magazines were first. He would write them in Bamsibat in Vrindavan. He would have his little room on the roof. Could go up there and see the Yamuna. It was beautiful, beautiful. The birds swinging by and the fish jumping and it's just an amazing view. And he had the little room on the roof, and there was a well that went down, through the floors, or I guess it would be an open square that went down through the different ceilings, and then finally it would go down to the well, and he would pull his water up from the roof, which was quite strenuous. And that's how he got his water up there. And it's just really austere and simple, humble places where he stayed and worked and produced so many wonderful literatures that we have now. So it was really exciting now, when the guy said, oh yes, this is where the press was that Swamiji used to print his books. He would bring the paper there, and then they would get printed, and he would go up, and he went upstairs and he would edit and proofread the books, and then send them back down, and they'd change, by hand, they would change the typeset until they got it close to being right. You can see the old knockoff books, how there's so many quaint old British language word usages. But when I walked upstairs, it was to see his desk where he edited. Behind him, they instead of closets and anything in wood would get eaten by the termites, so they had right in the walls described, and nothing had changed. The buildings were there, the same farming was there with no tractors, oxen, and simply a wonderful experience. And also this was reflected in the authenticity of the Lilamrita. That's why it's so important. That's why it stands as such an important book in the books, the authorized books about Prabhupada. This is called the authorized by the GBC, and Satsuru Maharaj's pure reputation, checkered one spot, but he did it. He was able to put that all together and give a really genuine picture of Prabhupada, and he kept himself out of it, even though he was, in a lot of the scenes in America and around when he was the secretary and servant when he served in that capacity, and he was an insider with Prabhupada. So it does stand as a really, really important and accurate account of Prabhupada's life. It's not what they call a hagiography. That's a book or a biography written about some spiritual person, or generally spiritual person, that sort of gives spiritual or exaggerated importance to ordinary activities. Did you see Swamiji, when he drank water, it was like he was actually drinking Ganges water because he transformed it in the glass before drinking, or any kind of thing that would like I say, it would give an advanced, or not an advanced, but a sort of a skewed picture of someone's activities, ordinary activities that were given great or overrated spiritual importance. So it's not a hagia, it's the academic community really appreciated that it wasn't that kind of a book, that it was written very accurately, and that the use of oral history was important to them. And that's where another place where the interviews come into play is like a lot of it's like Vishaka and Yadabar's film, where they use the exact words of the people that were there, or that he had a slight or major relationship with, and in their own words that would be there, and that's in the biography, and they appreciate that kind of thing. He read, Satsuru Maharaj read many different biographies before he started, and then chose a particular style to follow. What was it? Biography of, I forget. He chose a particular biography and followed that writing style, and so that was appreciated by the academics, that it wasn't a hagiography, and that it was genuine and accurate. Like I said before, we would collect amazing things like I'm sure you've all seen the movie Matchless Gifts by a couple. They were in college making a little documentary film of the Prabhupada and the devotees, and they showed up with their movie. How when I first got to New York, there was like 100 book distributors out every day meeting 100 people. So like so many potential leads were there, and I just asked everyone, please carry a notepad and write, just as part of your presentation, ask, did you ever meet Swamiji or Prabhupada or A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami? So on the first day, one of the ladies came back and had the names of this couple who made this documentary, and Matchless Gifts, you've seen it. And then they came to the temple, and we traded a life membership for them in trade for sort of rights to use their film. So we traded the film for life membership, and they were very friendly and warm, because actually they really liked the devotees, and the fact was, if they were still traveling doing some filming, so they could stay at a temple and tell their story, and they'd always have a place to stay, a place to stay and a place to take prasadam. So that was really a nice find. It's a similar one in the there's that one film of the hippies dancing in a chain around Prabhupada on Hippie Hill. And that movie came from the San Francisco Public Library, one of the largest library in San Francisco. And I just went to this, somehow or other, I went to the movie section, and boom, there it was, so I nipped it. Sorry to say, but that's what happened. That's how we got that film. And different things, news. I looked through the microfilm. Everything was on microfilm, not on computer. So you have to, go through thousands of pictures on microfilm, to cover the 10 years or 12 years. And then, so we had all that information, anything, we could get from the libraries everywhere. And there was always something. Prabhupada was always an interesting subject matter for them. So all that was there, added to the pile of the growing pile of background information on Prabhupada. And it just kept going, especially the part where you get leads. You ask somebody, well, where do you know anyone else, where anyone else is that knew Prabhupada or knew Swamiji, and then they'd, hopefully had contact information. I remember another special amazing event was I met Mukunda Maharaj at the corner of Haight and Ashbury Street, and we had an appointment to meet at 9 in the morning or something. I was staying at the Berkeley Temple, and he was somewhere else, and we were going to meet there. I got there early, and right behind me up some stairs, long stairs, was a very nice bookstore. And they always have their, in the front of a bookstore, they usually have a table with the latest books that came in. So I went and I was looking, it was like, I forget the name of the book, but right on that table there was a book with, it was like the 60s, people from the 60s that were still around doing things, at that time when the book was written. This would have been, 1979 still. So who's who in the zoo, pretty much. But I opened it up, and the end papers, it was the devotees. That was their doing kirtan on Hippie Hill. So it was just amazing. So that meant that all these people that were interviewed in that book had memories. They were there with the devotees and Prabhupada. So I started just tracking them down, and I got some amazing and funny. It was a funny group because they had all been into drugs and the hippie life, and a lot of them actually were. They thought I was maybe the police or something, and they were a little hesitant to tell me where I could meet with them and that kind of thing. So there was that element of fear of reprisal in the San Francisco interviews. So that was for volume 3. They were funny. Wolfman Jack was a famous radio announcer. Wolfman Jack. And he had a real husky voice, smoker's voice, and funny character. And, charismatic. He was still doing his radio show. So, these are all ingredients for Satsvarup Raj, for his, and then with all these ingredients, he stirred the ingredients and brought out the Prabhupada Lilamrita with so much solid evidence, and that you could never match it today. It's just impossible to match that evidence. That's why we say, read the whole thing, because you're getting first-class information. And the other thing we would do in the interviews is they'd say who else was there, and we'd keep notes, and when we interview that person, we'd cross-examine them, and say, well, what, who else was there, what color were the walls, or what did Prabhupada say about this? And it'd be like a cross-examination that they didn't know was going on, because I had previously talked to someone else that was there. So that was another layer of what's the word I'm looking for? Another layer of authenticity, that is very important to a book like this. So let's see what time it is. So there's 20 minutes, is it 20 minutes left?
5:09.
So it was 4 to 5:30. Why don't we have, that's a background on the Lilamrita. Why don't we have questions? I guess they can come in on the phone, or they can be phoned to Vanamali Prabhu, and then he can choose which questions to pass along. He's got my number. Everybody has my number. But it'd be good if he screened the calls and then put them in order, and I'll take questions, and we can go like that for, another, I have another service to do in half an hour, so we could go for half an hour if you'd like. It's it's really too bad we can't have a two-way communication, but that's the way it goes in the electronic world. So I'll wait for a phone call from Vanamali Pandit Prabhu, and then we'll take it from there. Maybe I'll go get a drink of water while I'm waiting. I'll be right back. No, I'll just go get it. I need to move my leg.
Yeah.
In the Howrah, the infamous Howrah train station in Calcutta, I actually saw a crowd like move in on some guy. I think he sold a flat bottle of soda to somebody. For some reason, there was a fight, and the crowd moved in, to figure out what was going on, and then there was somehow or other, the crowd decided to, they stomped the guy to death. He was just pulped. Haribo Prabhu? Yes. Please have my obeisances. Okay. Well, at the time we were doing, okay, I'll speak for, the question is there any information about Prabhupada's family from that time? Because it doesn't appear like there's any interviews in the book. And unfortunately, at the time, they had initiated a legal fight to take over ISKCON. They're saying, well, this is our father, and these are all his properties, so they should come to us, as rightful heirs. And the other side, from our side, the answer is, well, he's a sadhu, he's civilly dead when he takes sannyas, and it's in India. Everybody knows that a swami is, has given up his relationship or connection with the family. So that held up in court, and I believe there was some money outside some sort of payment, maybe some sort of arrangement to take care of his wife and children, you know, a certain amount of money, but certainly not, they weren't, you know, they didn't get ISKCON itself and all the properties, but they may have gotten something. So that whole drama was going on during the interviews, and therefore they weren't cooperating. Ultimately, I think, you know, I heard that Vrindavan, his most responsive son, or his best son, who tried to help him in the business and, you know, in general be a good son and do what his father told him to do and help him out, Vrindavan Das, or Vrindavan. And ultimately, I think he wrote a biography, not a biography, a journal. He had kept a journal, and it reversed an important detail where we had said there was just this one taxi driver was the only person there to see Prabhupada off to America. And in Vrindavan Das's journal was an entry that was, he was there and a few other people, so Prabhupada didn't leave alone, you know, walking up the stairs and coming to America with a 0-person travel party congratulating him on his travels. So that's the story. That's why his family wasn't involved in the interviews, because it was the legal battle was going on, and then they, you know, legally you're not supposed to have any association with the other party. So, any other question? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I think that was one thing bothering me. Great. Prabhu, one, we have a question from America.
Uh-huh.
She's asking, I have a question about your travels. Were you able to travel to Moscow during the period? Just curious about your experience there.
Yeah, no, at that time I wasn't allowed to go. The Cold War was going on, and I'm an American, so that blocked me from going. The Indians had a much better relationship at that time, so that's what was going on. I had an American passport, and Americans were not welcome in Russia during the Cold War, because that would have been, yeah, that's what was going on.
Thank you. We have some questions from Krishna. He's asking, Hare Krishna, Prabhu, how is all the research material you collected maintained?
What I did was,
Bala, what was the question?
so the question was, what happened to all the material that was collected during that time? So what was beginning to happen was people wanted to have access to that. And since no one was funding us, BBT was giving a very little bit of money, and we had to collect the rest ourselves. So we sort of felt that it was especially me, that it was our decision what to do with that. And for me, I was getting pressure from different senior devotees to turn over the records. So it was not in a proper mood. It was looking in the interviews. A lot of times people would speak half an hour, sometimes more, about why I left Krishna consciousness and which authority did something to me that made me leave, or who did what to me. And a lot of those people were still senior devotees, and there was a lot of misinformation and very emotional information that would be damaging to, or in the wrong hands, to different devotees. So I decided that what I did was I sent the material back without making a copy. I sent the interviews back to the person and said, please read this and send back anything more that you remember. So in that way, the people got back their own interview, and I thought that was a reasonable way to send it back. A reasonable way to dispose of it, I guess is the way to say it. And the person that was heaviest on me to get the information, I finally had to say, I'm sorry, sir, but actually, if you want to know the truth, about 50% of the people that left said it was because of you. So after that, he didn't pursue the subject any further. And he was very known to be very heavy and a little bit on the cruel side. So that's what happened to the, and a lot of the, there was a fire at the press too, and there was things destroyed in the fire. So does that answer your question sufficiently? Haribo? Oh, okay. Yes. The question is, did I have any personal interaction with Prabhupada? And the fact is that I joined in 1977 in June in Berkeley Temple, San Francisco area. And I joined in June, and Prabhupada left in November. So during that time, it was such a serious mood, and his health was so bad there was no letters, no one could visit. It was very restricted. So for that reason I had no personal interaction, but I felt through the interviews that because they were so, the memories were, none of them were more than, except for the ones in India, like the, from the volume, the first volume, Preparing to Come, A Lifetime in Preparation. Except for them, all the other volumes, there was no memories older than 12 years, so that's not very long, and they were very emotional and like heartrending. So I felt very satisfied by the end of it that I had, perhaps even more of a relationship with Prabhupada than most devotees, because the information wasn't out yet from the whole Lilamrita, and so much of it didn't go in. We had space limitations. It could have been 3 times as long, but then just from the point of, the reading and attention span, you couldn't put that much in. In fact, the 7th volume was composed of individual little books that came out about things that Prabhupada did that, like another arrival in Los Angeles, that type of thing, or those 108 roses were another temple opening. But different things had very good information about them. And so they were just sitting there waiting to be printed. So they were all put in one volume, and then ultimately that was connected to the, instead of a 6-volume series, it's a 7-volume series now. So that's one thing. I forgot, what was the question again? I'm getting a little tired here. My personal. So personally, I felt very close to Prabhupada from doing the interviews, because it was the people themselves were so, devotees or people that met him, it was so his association was so fresh in their minds, and then that was passed along to me. So I felt like practically I didn't miss anything in terms of what he was doing and where he was and everything else. That Shakti was passed to me.
Had anyone of us the team got any opportunity to interact or to see some of the symptoms of Bala and what was their response after that? What should look at them? Did we get any, I don't know, any positive reviews?
There was a few of his godbrothers that were, very friendly, that they were friends of his, and associates that, he had collected money with them, and, he would go introduce a person to one of his wealthy clients, and they would give a lecture and collect for a temple, local temple, that kind of thing. So he was a collector, and then he would work with his godbrothers, and certain ones were very friendly, so they were interviewed, and they were included in the interviews. And some of them, they knew Prabhupada they were a very young age, maybe 16 years old, and a new brahmachari in one of the mats, that kind of thing. So, yes, the answer is yes. Some of his godbrothers were interviewed, and others weren't because they were, openly, I guess you'd have to say they were offensive. So, stayed away from them. Is there any other?
One that, yeah, we have one more. So have you personally written any book in this question on Krishna's life?
Did I write a book?
Yeah.
No. Satsuma Maharaj has written, he was, he was still on a roll, say, I don't know if you know that connotation, but he was very much Prabhupada conscious after all this intense writing, so he himself wrote more openly from his point of view. With the biography, he was transparent and practically non-existent in the biography. But then, he himself wrote, I think, 10 other books about Prabhupada, like Remembering Prabhupada, Prabhupada Meditation, 100 Prabhupada poems, that type of thing. So he's written more books about Prabhupada from the viewpoint of a person that, separate from the Lilamrita. And he wrote on his own, so there's no necessity for me to write a book. He's the writer. I'm just the worker bee. Any other questions?
Devotees are happy because they would like to share their appreciation to you. Thank you, Prabhu, for your time. We are very grateful to you.
Well, it's
Appreciates
nice subject.
how you have. Trust me, I would like to go on for maybe 2 more hours.
Yeah, I have other. Yeah, I actually have to go. I have other services in terms of Satsuma Maharaj gets up at 2, so he, I have to make an offering to his deities and organize his bedding and that kind of thing. So the time is up for me.
Thank you, Prabhu. Once again, on behalf of the entire and all the devotees here, we express our deepest gratitude to you and all owing to your wonderful service. I think because of the theme for the this particular Bhagavatam Swami, we are able to, initially we are talking on how we are able to understand Srila Prabhupada, we are able to understand what is devotion, we are able to understand how the devotees deal with and how Srila Prabhupada deals
Jai. Haribo. Oh, I can hear now. Oh, I guess that's coming through your phone, right?
Maybe Guru, one more request that we can, I think we got that some devotees said that they would read like village community, they would read Lokasamina, Guru Lagitrishna Lokasamina. Maybe we can have the one more session after a few months down the line.
Yeah, maybe after people read the whole Lilamrita, then we can, the 6 books, and maybe we can have another conversation. But people should read, they should read the book first, and then we have pertinent questions. Read the books. All right, so I'll close the meeting. Thank you for inviting me to speak on such a nectarian subject matter. All right.
It's really an honor and great privilege to be here with the privilege. Thank you once again.
All right. Hare Krishna.
Shri Prabhupada, God bless you. Eternal Kirtan, Dr. Swami Maharaj, and all glories to your service. Okay.
Jai.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees.
Haribo.